This computer. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Black Girl Math. I'm Beta Gray of Black Girl Math, and I am so excited to be sharing my summer reading with you for this month's episode, and two of the authors who wrote the book, Engaging in Culturally Relevant Math Tasks, Fostering Hope in the Elementary Classroom. So I want to introduce two of the three who were able to join us, and then of course the third author. So we have Dr. Shelley Jones, who is a professor of math education at Central Connecticut State University, and also author of two other books. The most recent is Women Who Count, Honoring African-American Women Mathematicians. We are also joined by Dr. Yolanda Parker, who is a full-time faculty at Tarrant County College South Campus in Texas. The third author is Dr. Lou Matthews, who's a global mathematics creator and founder of Inspire Math. He's also the director of science and math for Urban Teachers. So we're sorry we missed him, but we wanted to give him a shout out too.
Hey, Lou.
Thanks so much for joining me both, Dr. Jones and Dr. Parker. I have been super excited since I heard about your book coming out that I pre-ordered it. I'm have notes already. So I just want to start off with my usual question I start off with is and how did your math story lead to writing Engaging in Culturally Relevant Math Tasks? Who'd like to start?
Well, I'll start. I always start with two things. One is my own personal math story. I really didn't know that girls couldn't do math, quote unquote, or I didn't have those negative vibes when I was growing up. We just did what we did. You know, my parents always encouraged me to do good work, no matter what it was that I did. I attended Spelman College. So when I went there, it was Black excellence everywhere. And it was sort of just known that you would do well. And STEM happens to be one of the things that was really pushed at Spelman College, in addition to the arts and literature, but STEM was definitely something that was pushed. As far as a teacher, I was a middle school math teacher for 7 years in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And I had a student that basically what I found out was he was an artist. He wasn't really paying attention to my math lessons. So I walked to the back to see what he was doing, and he was drawing, and he was so good. In 8th grade, he was already what I would call an artist. He was drawing freehand. So I said, wow, I love this. Let's get him involved in the math. So in another lesson where I needed to do ratio and proportion, and we were doing stretching and shrinking, I used him to help other students understand how to stretch something, but we used math and we used the coordinate grid. And what I learned back then was I looked at students in my classroom as I thought I was just looking as the whole student, but I was only looking at one part of the student. I was only looking at, let's say his name is Larry, the math student. I wasn't considering that Larry was coming in with a whole lot of different identities. And I didn't know these words at that time, but I knew that I needed to reach Larry some kind of way. And so I feel like because I taught in the same district where I grew up and went to school, I think sometimes when you're in that kind of situation, you have a different feel for the students. They're not just these students, they're actually sort of your kids, like they live in your neighborhood, right? And so if I could say anything to teachers, I would say, if you can think about these kids, not as just your students, but these are the kids like your own kid, like your own students at home. And I just wanted the best for them. And if we can think that way, I think that we're at a good start for culturally relevant pedagogy. All teachers want to connect with students. I know that's in their heart, and I know that's what they want to do, but just only connecting to their interests is not enough. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's a start. And so connecting to his interest or his strength of being an artist was just a start, but I had to get to know Larry better as well. So I'll just stop there for now so that Yolanda could share her story.
Thanks, Dr. Jones. Dr. Parker.
Um, well, I have gotten this question a few times, and I it's hard to put it into just a little package of what of my math journey led specifically to this book. But I will talk a little bit about just my interest in the fostering hope part and the interest that students have. And you and I were talking before the program about how you were a former fifth grade teacher and how students are still hopeful and still kind of grasp math before something happens in those middle grades years. And so I noticed when I personally was in eighth and ninth grade, that was when I started tutoring all of my friends,
Mm,
all the ones who would ask me for help. And so I noticed that that was a critical time for a lot of people. And when I was in college, I would tell people that I was a math major, and I would always get, oh, I loved math until algebra. I loved math until about the seventh or eighth grade. And so when I was at Illinois State working on my doctorate, my dissertation study was on eighth grade Black female students and their experiences in math, because I wanted to know what it is that happens in eighth grade, in particular for Black female students, that is a turning point for them. And so that's part of my journey. And one of the things that was interesting from that study was one of the young ladies didn't really care for math, but the class that she loved, she was always talking about her fifth grade social studies class where they reenacted like the Civil War, or her English class where the teacher would sing the different things that they were supposed to learn. And so it dawned on me, that's really what's missing in math, is piquing that interest of the students who aren't necessarily interested in math. I was always interested in math. And so in high school, I was part of a summer program at Phillips Academy. It was called Math and Science for Minority Students. And I will never forget my first summer. My teacher was Mr. Matthews, and it wasn't Lou, it was another Matthews. And that was the first time that I learned about, so at 14 years old, that was when I finally learned about our roots in mathematics, why African descended students should excel in math because we are descendants of the Egyptians. And he was always stressing how the Europeans and different people historically kind of stole from the Egyptians. And it was eye-opening to me. For instance, when we talked about the Pythagorean theorem, he told us not to call it the Pythagorean theorem because he said Pythagoras didn't come up with it. So we're going to give it a different name. And it was so funny. One of the students said, let's call it the brothers theorem. And so that was what we called it for the rest of the summer. But it was just so eye-opening. And so from that point on, I was always trying to find, kind of backtrack, what was this connection to Egypt? What was this connection to Africa in a lot of the aspects of mathematics that we're teaching? And so even though I was interested in math, that even piqued my interest more. And so that, coupled with the young ladies who I studied, just helped me to see that we really need to, some students just don't want to know the rules. They don't want to just learn the formulas. They want to know the why. And it's not out of disrespect. They've just got to find a point of interest. Why do I need to know this? And it's a matter of, what does this have to do with me? Not necessarily, I don't like being in this class, or I don't like you. That's not what that question means. Is what does this have to do with me, and how can I be connected? And so that's something that we can do for the students who have an interest in math, as well as the ones who don't have an interest in math.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that what you were saying about studying eighth grade. So my teacher piqued my interest more in mathematics by sixth grade, and it set up the stage for eighth grade where I was like, oh, I'm taking math with my friends. So it was just four of us taking algebra because he had helped us accelerate, through sixth grade math, seventh grade math, and just found us in the right spot and set up where we could be successful. So it's super important in terms, like you said, of getting to know your students, what do they need, and also of finding that all right, how can we make those connections to algebra and beyond? And even before then, because we're, as a fourth and fifth grade teacher, I saw students who had lost interest even by the time they got to me. And so thinking about that of so based on the book and thinking about the tasks that we give students to get them excited about mathematics, can you define culturally relevant teaching and pedagogy, and then and how it ties into the book and why it's important? I think there's a few different questions I asked.
Well, why don't you start with how do you define it?
One of the things that we focus on in the book is identity, kind of like where I ended with what I was saying, for students to be able to identify with the mathematics, and for teachers to identify with the students, their community, and just kind of a wraparound. So with the culturally relevant math, you don't want to just end on changing the name, just focus on changing the names or adding something that may be superficially related to the culture, but really digging deep and helping the students to identify to the math and then take it to a point of action. So I've learned this math, I can apply it to a real world concept in a meaningful way. And that's where we get into like social action and social justice, excuse me, with connecting our tasks to the community. Shelley?
Yeah, and so what I would add to that is, the focus on that action part, because a lot of times when we talk about culturally relevant teaching, many people tend to focus on making the connections to the students, to their identities, to their interests, even to their communities. But in addition to making that connection, how do I help to honor students, honor what they come into the classrooms with, not just have this curriculum where all we're worried about is teaching the curriculum. Well, what about the students? What about the children, right? So how do we honor what they're coming in with? How do we honor them? How do we honor their people, their community? And then take it to that level of, okay, now that we're saying we're going to honor what you come in with, what does that mean for you? Like, what will you use this math to do? How will this math, help you, for one? And a lot of times math will help students and families to critically examine, the status quo, critically examine what's going on in their lives and how they might change those things. So a lot of times we let math do things to us, but we don't use the math to help to do things that we want to do. And so that critical component is critical. And that's the component that has been missing a lot, because sometimes critical could be uneasy for us, right? We're not sure about what topics we should talk about. But if we ask students, they will tell us. Students will tell us the things that, either they're worried about or they would like to know more about. Students want to know about social issues. So why not help them to learn about those issues using mathematics? We don't need to hide from students because they're already looking at it on the internet and on TV, and they're talking about it with their friends. So why not help them to really understand what's going on using mathematics? So that's that critical consciousness part where they're learning about themselves, they're learning about their communities, but they're also learning, what can I do? How can I be an advocate for myself? How can I be an advocate for my community? It doesn't have to always be the way it is. It could be as simple as a vote. And Latson Billings, when she describes culturally relevant pedagogy, she has the word political in it, right? We're going to empower students politically, but it doesn't necessarily mean, R's and D's. Politically just means, how can you use math to help you to do something you want to do? It could be as simple as students in a middle school. In an article that I read, the teacher says, what are some things that you're concerned about? And the students wrote a list of topics that they were concerned about. And the teacher chose the topic that would best help her to cover the curriculum, the math content. And so she chose the overcrowding of the school. Because with the overcrowding of the school, we can look at area and perimeter, and we can look at, population of students per square foot in the school and things like that. And so that's what the teacher did. She wrote lessons that brought in that concern that they had, but they were more interested in learning about area and perimeter because they were using something from their real life. And not only that, they wrote to the school board to say, our school is overcrowded and we know it is because of these numbers. They were able to explain how they knew their school was overcrowded. And the next September, they did not admit more students into the school that year because of that student action. And so it's not, student action could be something as simple as writing a letter. Whether or not anything happens because of the letter, it's the fact that the students tried and they understood how they could use math to, first of all, illuminate, something in their real life, and then, advocate for themselves.
I love that you said, like you said, in terms of the action and also that empowerment piece of the critical consciousness of, hey, this is what is affecting my community, my school community, my home community, and how to tie in the mathematics with that. And so you highlighted an example of a problem and what a teacher did in middle school. And so one of the questions that always comes up as I talk about culturally responsive, culturally relevant mathematics is, why is it important? Like, why do students need to be exposed to culturally relevant math tasks?
Well, my question is, why not? I was trying to find another way to say it, but anything that can enrich a student's experience, why not? Math doesn't have to be so sterile and stoic and just working on the bare minimum naked problems. It can be something that makes sense to them, and not just the train A leaves the station, train B leaves the station at this time, when will they meet? It doesn't have to be the same old types of problems. And by doing this, it will allow students to be able to see math all around them. If we bring in more genuine types of tasks for students to tackle where they can care about it, it has something to do with them, and it's not something that has to do with another school. Like with the example that Dr. Jones brought up, this is our school, this is right in front of us, this is something that's going on, and you wouldn't have to answer the question as much, when am I ever going to use this? Because we're using it right now. We're using these ideas to do something right now. And so, just simply put, why not?
Amen. Exactly. I often get it just like, how, like, this is what I'm telling you, that in terms of the benefits of a culturally relevant math task, and that they need to see the connection. I just saw an interview or video, I should say, recently of Viola Davis, and she was asked, like, why is representation important? She's like, it is the physical manifestation of someone's dreams, that they have, like, we have to see it to be it, as Shonda Rhimes has said over and over again. And so in thinking about, writing a math task and a culturally relevant math task, again, the second question I often get is like, how do you do that? Where, like, how do I either take something I already have or do it from scratch? So what is something that you recommend in the book in terms of like going through of how to write a culturally relevant math task?
So, all right. So I wanted to go back just a second, and then I'll go and jump into that second question. But the why not, I was thinking the same thing as Dr. Parker, is why not? Why not? And especially because teachers are asking, how can I help my students to be more into the math, be more engaged? So if you ask that question and then we give you an answer, then you have to be willing to at least try that answer. And that answer is culturally relevant pedagogy. And the other thing is, we are losing a lot of our kids in the math pipeline, in the STEM pipeline. And so that's another reason, is because we're losing so many Black and brown students that don't want to go into math because they've been turned off because of it. And usually they're turned off because we have this sterile view of math. Like math, you know, when we hear about the word rigor, and we talk about rigor, but we talk more about demand, cognitive demand, and what it makes, how does it engage students so that they're thinking. But there's this thing that rigor must mean, you know, it has to be so difficult, you know, that, you know, students are turned off by it. And no, that's not what rigor means. Of course, we want it to be challenging, but we want students to want to figure out the answer. Like, why would I want to know that? And how do I figure it out? In terms of how do we do it? We can start with a context, like I was talking about before. We can start with a social issue. And Dr. Parker might want to talk about the hope. I think she was saying something about the hope wheel. But we can also look at standards. One of the things we do in the book is we say, are there some standards that are more easily adapted to a culturally relevant math task? And a lot of times we find that, yes, it's true. You know, if you think about statistics, you're always going to be able to connect that to a social issue. When you talk about area and perimeter, volume, you're talking about real life. You know, I ask students to take photos. Jackie Leonard did the same thing. Take photos of your community or of your home that has math in it. Bring those photos back and let's talk about it. So we might see math in the shapes of buildings. We might see math. One girl brought in, and I talk about this, she brought in a picture of her sofa in her living room, and it had Islamic tessellations. Whenever you talk about a floor, lots of times you have hexagonal, this or that. So you have all kinds of math all around you. Gloria Gilmer, she talked about the math of box braids and the math of cornrows. So if we can help students to see that, hey, you're already doing math, then we can pull the context in and then bring the math with it. And I think it just takes a little more thinking, because we're so used to talking about the trains leaving the stations. Well, let's do something different. If I'm a teacher and I want to talk about camping, I was talking to a teacher and she says, well, I wanted to do a lesson and students were going to go camping. And she said, can you believe it? None of them have been camping. I was like, okay, well, what do they do?
Right.
Ask them, what do you do in the summer? Oh, they go to a family reunion. So then we did one on a family reunion rather than camping. It doesn't mean that we can't do a context of camping, but we can also do a context of reunion and maybe do the camping next time. So it doesn't mean that students can't learn something new, right? The window view, but sometimes we need the mirror view. Kids, especially Black and brown students, they very rarely get to see themselves in the math. They always think it's somebody else's math, but we can show them that it's their math as well. And we do that by finding context that work, finding social issues that work, finding standards that closely align to some of those things that, you know, some of the curriculum, we look at the standards and then we say, well, what can this connect to in real life? Because it's all about real life.
Right.
Even though I will say, I remember when I went to a teacher's conference one time, and one of the mathematicians there, we were talking, and he says, well, just be careful that you don't make it seem like every math has to have a context or an application, because sometimes it doesn't have an immediate application, but it's the thinking that gets us to a later application. But first, we have to have students that even want to do it, right? And that starts a lot of times with an application.
And a lot of times they're denied that experience. How many times have you, talking with educators about, well, they don't know their multiplication facts. So how can I give them this problem about box braids or about, the mathematics that they see at home? And so because if we keep delaying it and we keep pushing it off, how do they get access to, like you said, to that context, to that social issue?
Yolanda, did you want to mention something about either the Hope Wheel or any of those?
Okay, well, I had just mentioned hope in general, but we do introduce an idea of the Hope Wheel, and it's similar to Bloom's taxonomy. And I had to look it up. And it's on page 57 in our elementary book. And so it's similar to Bloom's taxonomy, where there are terms. So the knowledge, the synthesis, the understanding, terms that you use in order to kind of frame your lesson or your task. And so we have that same idea, but using verbs of hope. And so love, protest, restore, create, inspire, invest. So in addition to looking at a context, we look to see, does the context fall into one of those areas? And usually it does. And finding standards that that would relate to that, because we have to teach with the standards, but it really, it allows kind of things to fall into place. And not saying that it's easy. By no means are we saying that this is cookie cutter and that this is an easy way to do these things, because we have been stretched in writing tasks for the book, but it's always helpful to at least have a place to start. Sometimes you already have a teacher would already have a place to start. They have a lesson or a task, and we also emphasize that we're talking about tasks, not necessarily entire lessons. I teach a graduate class at a university here, and I have them to modify tasks or create tasks from scratch, and they always give me lesson plans. And I'm not looking for the big shebang. We're looking for the task, and I guess that may seem too simple, but in that simplicity, it actually is complex, because you are zeroing in on like a snapshot of your lesson, a task that you are using to get to the next part of the lesson. And I really like what you said, Veda, about some teachers are hesitant to do something like this because students need those basic skills, a refresher on those basic skills. And so we're not saying to do this instead of that. There's a place for everything. With Bloom's taxonomy, and even the levels of cognitive demand, there's the memorization level, there's the remembering level. And so there's a time and a place for everything, but that doesn't mean that you can't give these students these tasks. The students will be motivated probably to learn their multiplication facts. I really want to do this. I need to work on my multiplication facts, but it's a task. It's not, we're not saying the entire lesson. And so part of the lesson could be a review of the multiplication facts, making sure that students have the baseline in order to be able to do these tasks. But with the tasks, we take it to another level. And so with that, again, if it's a lesson that a teacher is trying to revise, then they can start with that task part of their lesson, and then tie it into inspiring students, or protest, or something that's dealing with love. And so in our Hope Wheel, we have other verbs that can help a teacher to, like for instance, under love, nurture, care for, embrace, empathize, sustain, maintain, grow, appreciate. So when I'm thinking of growing, you put a lot of nurturing and growth into a garden. And so we have a task on community gardens. So that is something where you just spend a little bit of time just massaging a task that you have, and you can make it culturally relevant. And I point this out because a lot of people, and I'm putting myself in this category, a lot of us make it harder because we think we have to start from ground one, from scratch, and you don't have to. And so I'm hoping that through some of the strategies that we share in the book, that we give teachers a point of entry so that they can see, oh, I can do this. I already have something that's almost there. So I just need to add this action piece, or I just need to add this hope verb to it. And then that will just allow them to shoot off and be able to develop it into a culture relevant task. But I don't want to slide by the fact that we're talking about tasks. We do eventually discuss lessons and units, but we place intentional focus on the task that can be used to build into the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for emphasizing that and pointing that out so that, because other people are thinking like, I have this unit on, like you said, area and perimeter, or I have this, or measurement, I have this unit on multiplication, division. How do I do all this stuff? And so that is a great point of just like, one, start small. And both of you both shared that of also starting with the students. What are their interests, but even going beyond that? What are their concerns? What brings them joy? What do they, enjoy? What do they like about their communities? What can they share from home in terms of the mathematics and making those connections? And so I really appreciate both of you sharing your ideas and also sharing more and more from your book. I am super excited. And if you have not picked up a book yet for your summer reading, reflection, thinking about, all right, as you decompress from this, what has been a very difficult year, please check out Engaging in Culture Relevant Math Tasks, Fostering Hope in the Elementary Classroom.
I want to mention something. When you get your copy of the book, in the book, there is also a bit.ly where you can go to get things like the Hope Wheel, where you can just print out the Hope Wheel. So if you're doing professional development or professional learning sessions with teachers in your district or school, you can use that. You can also receive a template for revising a task that you already have to be culturally relevant. So as we look at like different levels of cultural relevance, like you start with a task that's already cognitively demanding. We want you to choose a task where students are already thinking. Okay, now we want to make a connection to the students or to the community, right? So you have an emerging task. Then if you have students take social action, or if you have them sort of challenge the status quo, then you're at the exemplary stage. So you have these different levels of cultural relevance that we take you through as well. And the revising a task to be culturally relevant template, it's just for a task. You pick one task and you say, okay, this task is at the developing stage. It's at the very beginning. I know it's cognitively demanding. Oh, I love this task. The kids really get into it. But now you want to even make a better connection to them. So the template will say, all right, how will we do this? All right, this is where it stands on the culturally relevant, cognitively demanding rubric at the developing stage. How can I make a connection to the community? So in the book, we give an example of a teacher that had the students, you know how you take a growing pattern and you try to generalize it with a formula. Okay, so the students were already doing that. That's pretty cognitively demanding. But what she did was she connected it to that student and the tessellations, the Islamic tessellations, which this particular student she was talking about saw it at their church, saw a tessellation at their church, or maybe it was their mosque. Anyway, so she took that information and she had the students look in their communities for Islamic tessellations, and what influence did that have on the community. So now the students are learning about their community. Where did that come from? And she found out some very interesting things about that particular pattern and actually where it came from. They were able to kind of look at, well, where does that pattern come from, and learn about their own community.
That's amazing. And again, that building that connection, building that pride, building that, and also for people who may not understand or may not know where those patterns come from. And also, you know, like you said, giving that window as well. Well, I really appreciate both of you spending time with me and talking about your book, and especially, and as you know, educators love resources, and also sharing where they can get resources, they can get even more support as they continue to read your book. So thank you both, Dr. Jones and Dr. Parker. All right.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you. And your viewers are welcome to follow us on social media.
Yes.
We're on Facebook. I'm mostly on Instagram, but Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. They can find us. I'm Yojo Parker on Twitter, Yolanda Parker on Facebook, and Dr. Yolanda Parker on Instagram.
Thanks. How about you, Dr. Jones? Where can we find you on the socials?
I'm Shelly M, as in Monica, Shelly M Jones 1. But I think the one I only use for Twitter. I think for Facebook, it's just Shelly M Jones. I got to get back on Facebook though. I got off for a while. I was hacked and I was just like, I'm leaving it alone. And I am also on Instagram.
Okay.
So I think it's just my name, Shelly M Jones.
Okay, great. And I'll post this so that everyone can find you too.
Excellent.
Oh, thank you so much, Veda.
Thanks.